I want you to close your eyes for a second. Imagine a heartbeat.
Okay.
But not a resting heartbeat. Not the kind you have when you're, just sitting on the couch.
Right.
I'm talking about a heart that is maybe panic-stricken.
Sure.
Or maybe ecstatic. We are clocking in at 140 beats per minute.
Wow.
It's significantly faster than disco. It is mechanical. It is aggressive.
And it is absolutely unrelenting. It doesn't swing. It just marches.
Exactly. You've got these driving synthesized bass lines, what musicians sometimes call the gallop, and then soaring over this cold, robotic machinery, you get these incredibly dramatic, almost gospel-level vocals. It feels like you are sprinting for your life.
Which is actually the perfect description because the source material we're diving into today, a fascinating column titled High NRG and LGBTQ Dance Music Symbolizing Liberation and Identity, uses this very specific Japanese term.
Oh, what's that?
It's shisoken, and it literally translates to a sense of sprinting or dashing at high speed.
That is the vibe today. Welcome back to the deep dive. We are cranking the volume all the way up on a genre known as high NRG.
That's high energy.
But, and here's the catch, we aren't just here to geek out over vintage synthesizers and 80s dance tracks, are we?
No. If you think high NRG is just, cheesy workout music or some retro dance fluff, you are missing the entire point.
Okay.
The mission today is to uncover the political and social weight of this sound. We're looking at how this specific aggressive tempo became the literal soundtrack of liberation for the LGBTQ community.
So it's not just a genre, it's a mechanism for survival.
Precisely. We're going to trace how this noise functioned as a tool for identity expression, how it became a sanctuary during the darkest days of the HIV/AIDS crisis.
Wow.
And how its DNA is actually the blueprint for the hyperpop and EDM you hear on the radio today.
It's wild to think that a genre that can seem so fun and even plastic holds such a heavy history. So let's get into the anatomy of the sound first, because to understand the culture, you have to understand the noise. I think most listeners have a vague idea of disco, right?
Yeah.
The Bee Gees, less strings, funky bass guitars.
Right. Disco is the parent. But high NRG, which emerged in the late 70s and early 80s, is the rebellious, somewhat harsher child.
Okay.
You have to understand the shift in production. Disco was expensive. I mean, it had orchestras, horn sections, session drummers. High NRG was the sound of the future crashing in.
The source highlights the speed first and foremost. We're jumping from the standard disco, 110 or 120 DPM?
Yeah, around there.
Up to 130 or 140. But it's not just faster, is it? It sounds stiffer.
That is the key. It's the quantization. In traditional disco or funk, you have human drummers. There's a groove, there's swing. High NRG stripped the human groove out of the rhythm section entirely. It relied on sequencers and drum machines.
So it's the rise of the machine.
It is. Think of the famous producer Giorgio Moroder. He basically invented this template with Donna Summer's I Feel Love, though that's technically the bridge between disco and what came next. But High NRG took that template, the rolling, synthesized bass line that goes dum-da-da-dum-da-da-dum, and locked it to a grid.
It's mathematically perfect.
Exactly. And the source mentions that this shift wasn't just aesthetic, it was about intensity.
Right.
It moved away from those expensive, lush orchestral arrangements, the horns and strings of the 70s, toward a purely electronic pulse.
Which was cheaper to produce, I imagine.
Cheaper to produce, sure. And that allowed more independent artists to get involved. But it also created this fascinating tension.
Which is?
You have this cold, unfeeling, relentless electronic grid at the bottom. And then layered on top, you have these divas, usually women or men, singing in falsetto, delivering just raw, explosive emotion.
It's a cyborg dynamic. The machine drives you forward, but the voice feels the pain.
Yeah.
The source describes this combination as creating a catharsis that actually surpassed traditional disco.
And that word catharsis is the anchor here. It implies purging, a release.
So it's not just about having a good time.
No, it's about expelling something. And to understand why people needed that release, we have to look at the track that literally named the genre.
Evelyn Thomas. High Energy,
Yeah.
1984.
A massive track. It just hits you like a freight train.
It really does. If you haven't heard it, imagine a wall of sound. It's chaotic, it's loud,
Yeah.
and it exploded the genre globally.
It did.
But let's pause on the music theory for a sec and pivot to the room where this was being played.
Right.
Because context is everything.
Right. So we're looking at the post-Stonewall era. The Stonewall riots were in 1969, which kickstarted the modern gay rights movement. So now we're in the late 70s and early 80s.
And I think there's this common misconception, right?
Mm.
That after Stonewall, the doors just flew open and everything was a rainbow parade. People think, oh, the 70s disco, everyone was having fun.
Far from it. The source makes it very clear. Discrimination, police harassment, social ostracization, it was all still rampant. You might lose your job, your family, or your physical safety just for being who you were. The freedom was very contained.
So the club isn't just a place to get a drink on a Friday night.
No, the club is a fortress. The source calls them safe spaces, but I think sanctuaries is almost more accurate.
Sanctuaries, I like that.
It says the club was a place to escape societal oppression. It was the one place where you didn't have to look over your shoulder.
And high NRG was the liturgy for this service.
Exactly. It was the background music, the BGM for survival. The source has this beautiful line. It provided a space to dance and love each other without being bound by anyone.
Without being bound. When you frame it that way, that aggressive, fast tempo makes so much sense.
It does.
It's urgent. It's not a slow sway. It's a run.
It's about seizing the moment because the moment might be all you have. The source explicitly calls it music of liberation. When you stepped onto that dance floor, the rules of the outside world, gender norms, behavioral expectations, they just dissolved. That 140 BPM beat was driving you away from the judgment you faced during the day.
It's so interesting because usually when we think of relaxing or escaping, we think of slow music.
Yeah.
You know, ambient, jazz, maybe acoustic.
Yeah, something mellow.
But here, the escape is found in overstimulation.
That's a great observation. It's because the silence allows your thoughts to creep in, the anxiety, the fear, the societal pressure.
Yeah.
But when the tempo is that fast and the synths are that loud, it crowds out everything else. It forces you to be in the present moment. It's like a meditative state induced by chaos.
And this brings us to the lyrics. Because on the surface, I feel like people dismiss high NRG lyrics as just fluff.
Oh, for sure.
I love you, I need a man, heartbreak. It sounds like standard pop fodder.
It does if you just read it on a page.
Mm-hmm.
But the source argues that these lyrics contain a kind of double meaning. They resonated as the earnest emotions of the community.
So when a singer is screaming, I am what I am, or I need love, in a straight club, it's just a pop song.
Right.
But in a gay club in 1982,
It's a political manifesto. Precisely. It's the difference between a cliche and a plea for dignity. Themes of forbidden love, the search for connection, self-liberation, they all took on this massive weight.
it reminds me of the concept of coding in history,
Well,
where you say one thing, but the people who know what you really mean.
exactly. And you had specific icons who became the avatars for this. You cannot discuss this without talking about Sylvester.
The Queen of Disco, an absolute legend.
Sylvester was openly gay, gender fluid in presentation, and just unapologetically loud about it. And this was decades before terms like non-binary were in the mainstream lexicon.
Right.
The source calls his track, You Make Me Feel Mighty Real, the origin of high NRG spirit.
That title alone, mighty real.
Think about it. In a world that tells you your identity is fake, or a mental illness, or a sin, to have a song screaming about being mighty real,
Yeah.
that is an assertion of existence. It's not asking for permission to exist, it's declaring it.
It's reclaiming reality. And musically, that song is the bridge we talked about. It has the disco soul, but the drive is getting harder.
Yes, and it wasn't just American artists. The source brings up Hazel Dean.
Yes, the UK singer. She held the title Queen of Gays, which is quite the honorific.
I love that title. It speaks to the relationship between the community and the diva.
Why do you think that bond is so strong? Why did a community of mostly men connect so hard with these female vocalists?
Well, the source touches on this idea of earnest emotions. The diva Hazel Dean, Gloria Gaynor, Evelyn Thomas is usually singing about resilience, about surviving heartbreak, picking yourself up.
Okay.
Her songs like Searching I Gotta Find a Man were seen as speaking directly to gay male desire, even though she was a woman. The audience saw their own longing reflected in her voice. She was the vessel for the emotions they weren't allowed to express publicly.
And then we have to talk about the visual side, because high NRG and drag culture became inseparable. And the figurehead there is Divine.
Divine is pivotal. This is where high NRG fuses with the camp aesthetic and the performance art of drag.
The source mentions the producer, Bobby Orlando, here. The architect of that super gritty, cowbell-heavy sound who worked with Divine on You Think You're a Man.
That track is essential listening. If Sylvester was the soul of high energy, Divine was the punk rock attitude.
I can see that.
Divine wasn't doing passing drag. Divine wasn't trying to look like a pretty pageant queen.
No, Divine was chaos.
Divine was a punk rock grenade in a dress. The source says Divine destroyed the boundaries between music and gender expression. The performance style was radical and provocative.
It's confronting. You have this massive drag queen with a shaved hairline and drawn-on eyebrows barking, "You think you're a man," over this grinding industrial beat.
Right.
It challenges the listener.
It deconstructs the very idea of gender roles. It's saying, I am more of a man than you and more of a woman than you all at once, and doing it at 140 BPM, so you can't help but dance to it.
And that connected the music directly to the drag queen culture, which is a bond that still exists today.
Absolutely.
It paints a picture of such a vibrant, exploding culture, but well, we know what happens next in the timeline. The 80s wasn't just synthesizers and drag. The source shifts tone heavily here.
We have to talk about the shadow, the HIV/AIDS crisis.
This is the part that always gets me, the juxtaposition. You have this music that is literally called high energy, peaking in popularity exactly when the community is being decimated by a disease that destroys the body's energy.
It is a devastating irony. The source describes a dual reality regarding the music's role during this tragedy.
Break that down for us. What is the dual reality?
Okay, so on one hand, the music was pure escapism. We touched on this earlier, the sanctuary.
Right.
You went to the club to forget that your friends were dying. You went to forget the lesions, the hospital visits, the fear. The volume drowned out the grief for a few hours.
But on the other hand, you couldn't really escape it.
No. The source says the music became a soundtrack of life and death. These songs were played at funerals. Or you'd be on the dance floor, and a song would come on that you used to dance to with a partner who passed away last week.
So the dance floor transforms from a party into a memorial service.
A memorial service in motion. The source mentions that Sylvester himself died of AIDS.
And yet, they kept playing his music.
You played it louder. The source makes a really beautiful point here. It says that the music playing on was a testament to the people living on. It describes the scene as a festival of living amidst the backdrop of death.
A festival of living. That gives me goosebumps. It recontextualizes the dancing. It's not hedonism, it's defiance.
Exactly. To dance when your body is failing or when your community is under siege is an act of incredible bravery. It's saying, we're still here, you haven't erased us.
It's almost like the relentlessness of the beat. That mechanical, unending rhythm we talked about earlier became a heartbeat. For a community that was terrified, their own hearts would stop.
That is a profound way to look at it. The machine didn't get tired, so it carried the people who were exhausted. And that's why the high tempo was so necessary. A ballad gives you too much space to cry. A high-energy track forces you to move. It literally keeps you moving forward.
So moving out of the 80s, high energy didn't just vanish. It didn't stop. It evolved.
Music doesn't die. It mutates. The source traces a clear lineage. High energy's DNA, that fast tempo, the electronic focus, evolved directly into Chicago house, then Eurobeat, and eventually the massive EDM festivals we have today.
I can definitely hear the high energy influence in Eurobeat. That super fast, high-pitched energy is identical.
Absolutely. And think about the Japanese context for a moment, since our source uses the term shisoken.
Right.
Eurobeat became massive in Japan, fueling the para-para dance craze. It's that same high-octane synthetic energy.
But look at modern LGBTQ culture specifically. The source points directly to Drag Race.
Yes. The lip sync for your life, that is pure high-energy heritage.
How so?
The exaggerated energy, the high-femme presentation, the drama, that all links back to what Divine and Sylvester were doing. When you see a queen doing a death drop to a high-speed dance track, she is participating in a ritual that started in the 80s.
And musically, the source mentions hyperpop,
which I think is the most direct modern descendant. Think of artists like Sophie or Kim Petras.
Right, Sophie was incredible.
Hyperpop is all about taking pop tropes and pushing them to the extreme, making them shinier, faster, more synthetic, more plastic. That is the high NRG Philosophy 2.0. It's celebrating the artificiality to find a deeper truth. It's saying, yes, this is plastic, but my feelings are real.
It's like high energy 2.0. Faster, shinier, but the spirit is the same.
And the source notes that the original tracks still have power. You still hear Mighty Real at pride events and gay clubs today.
Why do you think that is? Why do young people today, Gen Z, who weren't even born when Sylvester died, still connect with this song from 1982?
The source suggests it allows new generations to re-experience the sense of liberation of that era. When a 20-year-old hears Evelyn Thomas today, they aren't just hearing a retro banger. They are tapping into an oral history or a sonic history of struggle and triumph.
It connects them to the people who danced in those dark rooms 40 years ago.
It does. It closes the loop. It reminds the current generation that their freedom was bought with a fight. And that fight had a soundtrack.
So let's wrap this up. We started by talking about a tempo, 120, 140 beats per minute. We talked about synthesizers and drum machines.
Right.
But we've ended up talking about a fundamental human struggle.
That's the power of the deep dive. The takeaway here is that high NRG is not just a genre tag you'd find in a record store bin. It is a vessel.
Yeah.
It embodies the history, the trauma, and the ultimate liberation of the LGBTQ community.
It represents a celebration of life.
Yes. And I think that is the lesson for the listener. It's easy to dismiss dance music as functional, something to jog to or drink to.
Sure.
But for marginalized communities, these sounds are fortresses. They are built out of necessity.
It really changes how you listen to a playlist.
It certainly does for me. You can't unhear the history once you know it.
Here's a provocative thought for you listening right now. The next time you're listening to modern pop or EDM or that new hyperpop track, ask yourself this. When you hear that exaggerated energy, that driving synthetic beat, are you just hearing a cool production trick? Or are you hearing the echo of a fight for survival that started on a dance floor in 1982?
Because that energy came from somewhere. It was forged in fire.
It wasn't created in a vacuum. It was created because people needed a beat that was strong enough to hold them up.
And realizing that adds such a rich layer of meaning to the music we enjoy today.
So here is our challenge to you. Go look up a track by Sylvester. Look up You Make Me Feel Mighty Real, or Divine's You Think You're a Man.
And listen to it not just as a song to tap your foot to, but as a historical document. Listen to the vocals. Listen to the urgency.
And imagine what that sounded like in a room where the outside world wasn't allowed in.
That is the sound of high NRG.
Thanks for diving in with us today.
Always a pleasure.
Keep listening and keep learning. We'll see you on the next deep dive.